Hi guys, so time for another Stranded Alien Dawn guide. Today I'm going to be showing you some of the things that I've found particularly helpful when managing survivors and trying to explain what I see when I've been observing how the mechanics work. Also, I do want to say thank you to everyone who took the time to post on the previous video. Everything that's been posted has been really helpful to anyone who's struggling with the game. And this is a new game. Pooling our knowledge helps people who are struggling. So really, thank you for that. It's been a fantastic response. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm just going to talk about all the things that I've found that have helped me when it comes to survivor management and just sort of stopping things going into a fustercluck, basically. It is still just my observation, so there's no factual basis in something the devs have said, so just be aware that I think it's correct, but it's not necessarily correct, or I might not understand the mechanic properly. Right, so I think we should start at the beginning, which is the selection of survivors for a new game. When it comes to selecting your survivors, it really is a balance between what their positive traits are, what their negative traits are, and what you plan to do with that survivor. It's also a huge element of it will be is how much experience you have with the game and how much you are going to be able to mitigate any negative effects. So Annette here, for example, she's a good cook and she does have a nice bonus of helping anyone who's having a bad time or having a breakdown. But she does have a bad movement speed. So if you were using her just for cooking and maybe just for crafting, so she didn't have to go far to actually do those things, that wouldn't be so much of a downside. But if you were trying to get her to go out and do construction or to do farming or something like that, that decreased movement speed would have a major effect. Carter is one who he's very good, and his entertainment thing, it just kind of becomes a non-issue later in the game. But when you're first starting out, you're going to have trouble fulfilling the entertainment junkie issue that he has. And that might be doubly hard if you're just starting to learn to play the game and haven't kind of got a system down for getting started and getting things up and going quickly. Connor is one where he has a really good positive, but he has a really bad negative. And that's another one that is about management of it and whether or not you're happy with having to manage that bad side. So it doesn't actually say it here, but he has an implant which makes his shooting really good, but it also gives him a migraine all the time. So it's one of those ones, it's like he can be out and about and he'll suddenly have a migraine and he'll go into a negative mood. Personally, I don't think he's worth it because when the migraines are going to hit, he's most likely going to be out and about somewhere, the way I personally use him. So it ends up being a detriment. So once again, it's like it's not necessarily that the bad side isn't manageable, but is it manageable within the scope of what you're going to use them for? There are some survivors who have some really good traits. Emmeline, for example, I think she's a fantastic one to use. Anything she cooks tastes brilliant, so that means that everyone is going to be getting a good buff all the time if she is your primary cook. She also has no real downside, so that permanently increased happiness means she's very reliable for her to do those sort of things. Vivian is one that I really want to highlight when it comes to the positive traits outweighing the negative traits. She can't heal, but everyone else will be able to heal, so that's not such a biggie. That 4-time work speed crafting with fabrics and leather, that is fantastic, especially if you're a new player to the game. One of the big hurdles that you are going to come up against when you first start playing is managing the clothing in your first winter. She makes that much less of an issue. There are another couple of ones that I think are particularly good. Ken doesn't seem to have any particular negatives. Lara is another one who seems to be really good. I use her for construction and farming when I've got her. And there are some that are just a bit funky. I mean, there are just some good all-rounders, like Jack is an example of a good all-rounder. He doesn't have any negatives and he can make people do better. So just make sure that you do actually spend a lot of time thinking about your survivors. If you've been having struggles managing them, you might want to actually have a look at, did you select survivors that work well with what you want to do and the way you play the game. So once you select yourself a team of survivors that you think are going to work well together, you then need to manage them. The biggest thing for keeping them up and going is obviously going to be their happiness. If they get really low on the happiness, they're not going to be doing great and they're going to have breakdowns and your base isn't going to be efficient. One of the big questions that I keep seeing on the forums is, what does this arrow mean on the happiness? The happiness in this game doesn't work instantly. It goes over time, which is kind of really good, and that arrow helps you. As you'll see here, that arrow is below where she is and it's just gradually going downward. But as you've probably noticed, it is far more weighted towards the negative than it is the positive. We've got, what, 9 times 6 there? So 54 positives. We've got 15 negatives. And look how low that happiness arrow is pointing. It's really a case in this game, more than anything, reduce the negatives that they're going to have. One of the very easy ways to control that is with giving them a private room. You see here, she's got a nice buff for a private room. I can't remember if they got a lower buff for 3 times 3 rooms, but these are 3 times 4 rooms and they are giving me +9. I think it was +5 in a 3 times 3, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Another thing that you can really do, just to more than anything remove a negative effect, is to cook 2 types of food. As long as they are having 2 types of food, they won't get the no food variety debuff, but they also won't get a food variety buff. Once you're cooking 3 types of food, they will get a food variety buff. But just the minimum for stopping that debuff to the happiness is cooking 2 types of food. When it comes to the food, it's very important to turn off this raw food thing. You don't want to be using it unless you absolutely have to. If they eat raw food, they immediately get a negative debuff, and you also take away any sort of positive buff you get. Just eating a quick meal will give them a positive buff. If they eat raw food, not only are they not getting that positive buff, they're then getting a negative buff on top of it, which, as we spoke about, is the game is far more weighted towards the negative. So that's actually like a double whammy. On a side note here is, if you do have a vegetarian, one of the things that you can do at the start of the game to kind of mitigate that is to turn off this emergency rations until it gets to winter for everyone. So you can grab yourself enough stuff to cook for them, and you can keep it outside. Any sort of buff that you get for food, for the storage, is about being under a roof. If we have a look at something here, it says outside, under a roof, refrigerated and frozen. Under a roof counts as indoors, or under a roof with like these shelvings here. But if you're doing that throughout the winter, or when it starts to get cooler, it will be under the roof, so it will have an increased shelf life, and it will start getting refrigerated and frozen as the temperatures go down. So until you have refrigerators and freezers, I would say ideally just freezers, in the winter, keep your food outside. It will allow you to deal with vegetarians for a lot longer. Another reason to make sure that no one is eating raw food is that raw food has a longer shelf life than cooked food. And that means that it's going to spend a long time where it's going to cause them to vomit phase. So even though they can already get ill from eating raw food, and then on top of that, you've got quite nasty food that they're eating, which is going to stay nasty for a lot longer. Whereas a meal, if they're eating a meal, it's much less likely that they're going to get it in the time when it's in a bad state, especially if you are storing it in something like a fridge or a freezer. And once again, I would say go for freezer. Another huge element to managing the happiness of your survivors is their schedule and making sure they get enough sleep and they get enough relaxation. But before we go into talking about the schedule, we need to talk about how the food mechanic works. So, I spent quite a lot of time observing the survivors. Their fullness goes down at a constant rate throughout the day. It is just under 12 hours to lose 50% of their fullness. The reason I say that 12 hours for 50% is that once they get to 50%, if they are idle, or they are in relaxation time, or they're going into sleep time, they will go and eat some food. If they're under 50% and they're working or sleeping, they will work through until they get to just under about the 25% mark. That seems to be the cutoff point where no matter what they're doing, they'll get up or they'll come back and they will eat. So you do have a little bit of a grace period between 50% and 25% where they will continue doing what they're doing until they either get into a time they're supposed to eat, or they will just idle and go and eat anyway. Once they get under 25%, they'll just stop what they're doing and they'll come back and eat. With all that said, that is the reason I go for a 12-hour schedule, and it's self-correcting. But first of all, let's have a look at these things here. Anything is allowed. Relaxation is dedicated for eating and relaxation. Work is obviously working, and sleep is for sleeping. But they will eat, and patient care is allowed as well. They're eating and patient care is allowed. But I will say that when they're actually asleep, it works as if they're working. So when they're asleep, they won't get up and eat as soon as they get down to 50%. It will be like work is, as long as they don't get low enough that they have to get up and eat, they will go through and they'll get, even if it lowers down, it won't be a problem. So that means that a 12-hour schedule is self-correcting. These are the times when they are going to be looking to eat naturally. And if they get down to sort of the sleep time where and they're just about to go to sleep, they'll eat then. But if they, for example, eat at 5 o'clock in the evening, well, by the time they get to their eat time, they won't be at 50%, so they won't try and eat. But they will sleep through all the way through till 7 o'clock. They'll be under 50%, but as long as they don't get under 25%, they won't get up and eat. So they'll get up, they'll eat, and they'll get full up to 100%, which means that it will then be 12 hours until they want to eat again, so you'll get a full day's work out of them. If you have a longer work day, I mean, 13 hours can kind of work. I'm not sure about 14 hours. I did find them getting out of sync a little bit. What will happen is that if they're on like a 14-hour shift, which means they'll have a much less relaxation and sleep time, is they might not actually get to the 50% by the time they do sleeping. So they might come back and eat at about 6 o'clock if they get really hungry, and they might go through, not eat, start working and go, oh, I'm hungry, and you lose even more hours on them. That's why I go for a 12-hour schedule, because it is self-correcting. You know, even if they do eat early, that will get self-corrected here. And even if, for example, they do eat around here, so they want to be eating here, if they're working or something, they'll be able to work through and to this time without getting down to the 25%. It may seem like adding in a longer work day would mean that you've got more stuff done, but once you add more hours in, the more chance it is they're going to get out of sync, and the more chance you're going to actually lose hours from them coming back and eating because they're just not self-correcting. So that's just something to keep in mind. Another thing to really keep in mind with schedules is that a nighttime schedule is absolutely a viable thing depending on the thing that you want that survivor to be doing. Emmeline and Annette, they are set to cooking, and they do have other things to do, but cooking is their primary thing. Cooking seems to be particularly good on a nighttime schedule because if anyone does happen to be a little bit out of sync and they come back and eat during the middle of the day, even if you've got all the meals fulfilled, if it gets down to at any point where the threshold where you want to keep the meals above this, your cook will stop what they're doing, run back and cook that one meal, and then go back to what they're doing. So you lose hours of work on them. Whereas by having them on a nighttime schedule, they get up and they eat because they're on the same 12 hours as everyone else. They start making the food that everyone ate in the morning that they weren't working for, as you can see like that. So they start remaking that food. Everyone comes back and eats, so they continue making that food. And then they get to about this point here, maybe 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and everyone's asleep. They're not getting up to eat. All the food is done. We get a good chunk of the nighttime of them just doing whatever else they're going to be doing. So one of the things I take advantage of that with is at the start of the game, once I've got all my major research done and I've got the ability to put people in houses and put down some really basic defenses. I'm not talking about turrets, just things like flamethrowers. Once I've got that sorted out, I will put most of my research on my cook and just let it tick over slowly at night time, because it just means that I have one thing taken care of and I've got 3 major things that can be concentrated on, like the crafting, the construction and farming, and the hunt and gathering. I can have 3 people concentrating on that, and Emmeline will kind of, or whatever cook I have, will cycle through and just gradually get my research done. You might also notice that I don't have like one big relaxation period. I have a relaxation period before and after they sleep or they work. That seems to work really well for me. It's like having that split out means that they just keep up their happiness buff, or at least get rid of their unhappy debuffs a lot more frequently. So it just keeps them topped up on their happiness more on the regular. It's really important that they are actually able to thoroughly use that relaxation time. They will go for a walk to relax, but there's some things that you can throw out really quickly and easily for them to be able to do. As soon as you get hay grass, you can make, for example, a shooting target. You can make one of these punching poles. I think it's just with a bit of fabric and some hay, I think. Can't remember off the top of my head. Let's have a little look here. Furniture. Yeah, it's just hay, wood, and some fabrics. Shooting target is just literally hay and wood. A dartboard does require a bit of fabrics and a bit of metal alloys, but it's not a huge amount. The armchairs, though, they do require quite a lot to go into. But some of these things, just whatever you can get them out quickly, and that will have a benefit and allow them to use their relaxation time more efficiently, so they'll get more buffs and less debuff. Having your survivors set up perfectly with their schedule and eating well and never having negative debuffs, that's great. But unless they're doing activities and they're doing them well, they're not going to be very good for your base, and your base isn't going to do particularly well. One of the big things that I see that a lot of people maybe haven't quite twigged is that you can micromanage your survivors. I often see people on the Steam discussions, like a lot of people saying, my survivors aren't doing this thing that I want them to do. You can right click, you can click a survivor and you can actually right click on most things and make them do it. Lara, for example, is not set to, let's have a look at her schedule, her activities. Right, so she's not set to cook, she's not set to research, she's not set to hunt. Let's go and find something and just point this out. I could tell her to hunt them even though she's not assigned to the activity. Just to be aware of that is that you can make them do things, you can micromanage them. I can make them haul and things like that. There's only one thing that I've noticed that they really can't do, and they really can't do it well, which is moving storages around. They don't seem to be able to be micromanaged for that. So if I were to empty and deconstruct this storage, I can't right click on it and tell them to do that, which does make storage movement a little bit annoying. It's actually at the start of the game, I actually hold off doing any big storages so that once I've selected my base location, I can make them, they'll just naturally start moving things into storage rather than having to then deconstruct that storage and wait for them to go over and pick it up and bring it back. By just having my storages once I've selected my base, it does kind of mitigate that a little bit. Obviously, you don't want to be micromanaging all the time, so you're going to have to set up your activity. First things first, do not use simple priorities. They will just make your life so much harder. Just use an example here. Emmeline, I want her to cook. The way it's currently set up is she will heal first. She will also, if she can't heal, she will cook. If she can't cook, she will craft. And if she can't craft, she will deliver. And after that, she'll start handling, harvesting, cutting, planting, mining. So it goes left to right, order of high to low. If you're on simple priorities and I had all of these things ticked, she would heal, then she would handle, then she would harvest, craft, plant, mine, then she would start cooking. You really do not want to be using simple priority. If you want things to run smoothly, you need to use these more advanced priorities and think about what you want them to do. So Emmeline, she gets up every night, she starts cooking. If there's no cooking to do, she does some crafting. If there's no crafting to do, she just starts delivering things around the base or transporting them around the base. Annette is also my cook. So she gets up every night and she starts cooking. If she can't cook and I've got research going, she starts researching. If there's no research going, she starts crafting. If there's no crafting, then she starts handling things. She doesn't start delivering because I don't have it low enough. So it's just an important thing there is that you can really tailor what they're going to do, which allows you to cover things and have people covering the covering of things. So, you know, anything, small jobs or anything that they're able to do, Emmeline and Annette over the course of a night will just do tiny little crafting jobs. These are things like, you know, doing some fabric crafting, things like that. Another example of not using simple priorities that can make your life a lot easier is with my farmers. You notice that both my people that are set to 1 for planting are set to 2 for harvesting. What that means is that they'll make sure that these are always planted. And then if something needs harvesting, they'll go over, they'll harvest it. And then once they've harvested it, and they'll probably transport the stuff somewhere if they can, they'll come back and they'll replant it. If I had it the other way around, where it was using, say, simple priorities, where they just harvested then planted, well, they'd spend a couple of days just harvesting everything, and then it would probably take even more time for them to go around and get everything planted, which is not a good use of my farms. It's more important that my farms are reproducing as quickly as possible, especially with these things here. You know, taking an extra day to get them harvested while everything else is still growing is far better than harvesting it and having half a farm that's not growing. You may disagree with that, and you may have a different way of going about it. Absolutely, there is different thoughts on this, but you can't actually select what you want them to do and the order you want them to do it in unless you are using these more advanced priorities. The final thing when talking about these activities, I will say, is think about what they're going to be doing and what works well together. So Lara is my constructor farmer. That seems to work quite nicely together because there will be large parts of the year where there is no farming to be done, and that's kind of when I push for more construction. So if there's more things that I want to do, I'll kind of wait till the end of the year and just throw it all together because she won't be planting and there'll be a lot less harvesting to do. But during the middle of the year, or the start and the middle of the year, I'll just let her manage the repairing, and then that will mean that she'll be going out and doing the farming. That's when I've just got her. I'm currently got Jack doing the farming with her, so I can be a little bit more proactive with my actual construction. But that's just something that I found is that, you know, those things work quite nicely together. Anyone who's going to be out and about works quite nicely together. So Ken, as you can see, is hunting, scavenging and mining. And this also still plays back into your selection of your characters, because Lara has that bonus for farming and she moves faster. So even if there is something that needs to be repaired, or even if I do need to do a bit of construction, she'll probably get to and from that construction really quickly and get over to the farm and doing things. Whereas Annette, no. Like, she probably wouldn't even get to the thing and back because she's 50% slower than Lara. If that makes sense, because 25% slowness, Lara's 25% plus. So just think about that when you're actually setting up the schedule, is what the survivor's going to be doing, and is it going to work well with what else you want them to be doing. Something when it comes to managing your survivors that I found really useful is knowing there's a couple of keybinds that will really help you. The first one is Control R. So if you've got no one selected and you press Control R, you will draft them all. And you press Control R to undraft them. But if I select, say, 4 of these guys, 5 of them even, well, I can't count, and I select them as drafted, even if I click off them, if I press Control R, I stop drafting them. So I undraft them. So it toggles off if anyone is drafted, but if no one's drafted, it selects everyone. Really useful. Another thing is that you can obviously shift and select different survivors, but if you shift and double click, you select all the survivors, which is once again really useful if you are drafted. You can, they say for example you've drafted them all but you've clicked off of them. Rather than you having to go click, 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 you can just shift, double click, and you've got them all. So if you need to move them about, say for example you're going off and fighting a large group of animals, or you're going to do a nest, that just makes your life a little bit easier. The final thing that I want to talk about before I finish up the video is still, once again, it's kind of circling around to managing your survivors, and that is the gear that they have with their cold tolerance and heat tolerance. That will make a big difference to your running of your base and just their general happiness. You'll notice here that I've got her in full carbon armor, and okay, she's got a crappy t-shirt on, but anyway, that's giving her above 17 degrees. So above minus 17 degrees is when she's fine, and below 47 degrees she's fine. I don't think I've ever had a heat wave that's gone that high. I can't remember one, and very rarely does the cold get down that low. That means that not only will she not be having a negative debuff, you've not got a debuff, she's not got a negative debuff if she's outside when it's cold or hot, but it also means that I don't need to manage my base heat too much. With this heat tolerance below 47 degrees, I don't actually have any air conditioners anywhere in my base. I even have a thermostat over here that's designed for air conditioners, but I've got this carbon armor sorted out, and I was like, well, That was a waste of a CPU. So yeah, so you don't really need an air conditioner when you get really good armor, and the heating can be set really low as well, because as long as it's above -17, not a problem. So this will make a really big difference as well to just your general setup for your base. But aiming for armor is quite far down the road, which is why I wanted to leave it to the end of the video to talk about. But actually giving them really good armor does make an efficiency bonus for the rest of your base. Just as working towards things that are handling will also make it more efficient. If you have a look in my crafting side here, I've actually got all of my fuel coming from fermentation barrels because I managed to get the research for that. And I've got all of my electronics and CPUs and power cells. Those are also being produced by the 3D printers. I was really lucky to get both of those technologies as breakthroughs. And just things like that, where a handling job is so much quicker than a crafting job. So by doing that, so anything that can be moved over to handling, even if it takes longer to do, you can just have multiple of them, and one person will handle 10 things far quicker than they'll craft one thing a lot of the time. So it's just something to keep in mind. Right guys, so I hope you found this helpful. I hope it helped you with managing your base. As with the previous video, if you've got any ideas or any suggestions or anything that I've got wrong, let me know in the comments. That will make it a lot easier for everyone else. I really did like how much of a response I got on the turrets video, so please do throw those things out. And if I end up remaking this video, obviously I will put those suggestions in. Have fun guys, catch you all soon, enjoy the game,